You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Adler and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cantina Cast. My name is Albert Padilla, and this is episode 529, a time-honored tradition here on the Cantina Cast. This is the Andor 1 year later. So we've always had these retrospective shows where we go back and take a look at a TV series, animated series, maybe a movie a year later, and kind of ask ourselves the questions, how did it hold up? How does it hold up today? You know, what's the cultural or what's the fandom impact of this? You know, we try to take into account things that have been released since then that maybe can recontextualize some of that stuff, or some things that the movies or the TV series have recontextualized now with new content coming out. So really excited to finally talk about this. We were going to do it about a month ago, and then this little show called Ahsoka came on, and that kind of threw a wrench in the whole process. But here we are. We're, I think, technically a year and a month later to talk about this. And with me tonight is I couldn't really think of a better person, honestly, to be on the show to talk about the Andor series. But please welcome Gus from the Triad of the Force podcast. Welcome back, my friend.
Hello. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited. Like this is great. I feel like in a way, yeah, we're celebrating Andor 1 year later, but we're also kind of celebrating returning to podcasting in some ways, as It's been some turbulent couple of months. So yeah, it's good. It's good to finally be talking to you here and like reminiscing on the powerhouse that was Andor.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, we're recording this on the eve of Halloween, and I don't want to throw you a curveball, but do you have any like plans tomorrow for Halloween? And do you have anything specifically Star Wars related? Nothing?
Well, I do have something Star Wars related.
Okay.
Supposed to record with Nani our next episode for Triad. So we'll see. We'll see if that happens, because it's always a thing to be able to come right after work, and then with the time difference with Puerto Rico and Chicago, make sure that we're
Right, yeah,
in the same headspace. So that our Halloween plans are going to be recording for the podcast.
Okay, all right.
I did my Halloween apartment. How about you? What are you up to?
Nothing. Kids are gonna go trick or treating, and the typical stuff. I mean, I've got all my inflatables out in the front yard, and they're all Star Wars based inflatables. So I've done my part. I've checked the box in terms of my neighborhood contributions.
Yes.
Yeah. So excited about that.
I agree. You don't need to do anything else, and you're doing the show today, so you're covered.
Yeah, we actually did we covered a story from Dark Legends about 2 weeks ago. Lauren and I did, and that was kind of our Halloween special. So if anybody hasn't had a chance to go listen to that, go listen to it. I think it's great. It's a lot of fun by George Mann. So, hey, before we get into our main show, I just want to say thank you to all of our Patreon members that honestly keep the lights on, keep the show going for us. If you guys are interested in Patreon, you can head out to cantinacast.com/Patreon. You can sign up there for as little as $2, and it goes all the way up to, I don't know, 15, 20. I don't know what it is. I don't remember anymore. But especially thanks to our now part of the tribe members. So that's Rob, Mike Borda, Lauren, Dante, Riss Bayless, Justin, Jackson, Sharkman, Dan, Daz, Isabella, Uncle Leon, Josh C, and Jacob, and our Delusions of Grandeur tour, which is our highest tier. It's Rod, CJ, Alex, Steve C, and our newest member, Das. Thank you guys so much for your contributions. It means the hell to us. It really does. It's just incredible and very flattering to even get that kind of support. So, of course, we're recording this live on YouTube. If you are interested, you can head out to cantinacast.com/YouTube and subscribe, like, do all the things so that you don't miss an episode going forward. This week, we have a lot of the High Republic Phase 3 coverage coming. So I can't really say anything about it, but holy bananas, it's good. That's all I can say right now. I shouldn't even say that, but it is so good. It's so good.
I wish I could say something about it, but Del Rey just refuses to send us any advanced copies. But maybe one day we'll get a comic book advanced.
I got
Shadows of Starlight was awesome, though. I will say that
was good.
That was an incredible kickoff, and I pre-ordered George Mann's. Oh my God, Eye of Darkness.
Eye of Darkness, yep.
But I got the UK Goldsboro special edition, so that won't be coming in for a minute. So
Yeah.
everyone's gonna have a big head start on me on that one. But from what I've seen or what I've heard more so, it looks like it's really, really good.
Oh man, I can't say anything, but it is good. It's really good. It's
Especially
we're back, baby. We're back.
because I don't know how you felt about phase two, but I don't know. Phase two didn't do it for me too much. I didn't really
Yeah.
connect with it. I felt like it was too short, but also too rushed at the same time. And I don't know. Hopefully, like phase three kind of, well, I know it will, because they've been planning this out, but ties phase two up in the narrative of the whole High Republic storytelling so that it makes more sense. Because right now it feels like very like, okay, why did we do this massive detour into like these characters that are essentially dead by
Yeah.
phase three? So we'll see. We'll see. But
Yeah.
I'm excited.
Good. You should be. That's all I can say. But all right. Well, let's get into the main show. So now you and I think so. We were at Star Wars Celebration together back in 2022. I think it was last year, wasn't it? I forget now.
Uh,
Yeah, it was last year because it wasn't the UK one, but
yes, it
it
was
was
last year.
there that
Oh
you and
my
I were.
god,
We had a brief
time.
conversation about the impact of Andor. It was just about to come out.
Mhm,
You had some panels that you guys were doing about inclusivity and Latin
mhm,
representation
mhm.
as well. But I want just kind of for our audiences, like, what is this series meant to you personally? What was your experience finally watching it for that first time? And then the ultimate question that we're going to try to answer here is, does it hold up for you 1 year later?
I mean, it's wild. Andor is definitely like a turning point for me as a as a Star Wars fan, as a Star Wars podcaster, as everything to me like in my Star Wars life right now, just because it was so consequential in terms of like one how we engage with Star Wars, two how we watch Star Wars, how we think about it, but also the experiences around it. I will preface it right by saying that when Andor was announced, I was on the fence about it. I was a little cynical
Hmm.
about the show because I mean I loved Rogue One when it came out. I was very
Right.
happy with it because it's it was the first Star Wars movie that hasn't doesn't really have to do with the Skywalkers. That ending notwithstanding, but I felt that because it did its own thing and it tied its story up with a nice little bow because all the heroes die and like it's a very self-contained story. I
Yeah.
was satisfied with it. Like I didn't really feel like we necessarily needed to explore all these characters because the traditional like, well, we know how it ends up, so we don't need the prequel. So when Andor was announced for it just we already know it's like can it be compelling? And thanks to me being cynical about it and then having to eat my words, I've kind of learned to just shut up when something is announced and just wait for the damn thing to come out
Right.
because Andor like blew my mind. And I have to have full disclosure, I was able to see Andor before most anybody
Yes.
else
Yep.
because
Yep.
I was extremely, extremely, extremely lucky and privileged to have been invited by Lucasfilm to go to the premiere down in Hollywood, and that was an incredible
Oh,
experience.
I can't imagine. Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it's just like you're in an environment that's designed to be heightened and play off of your emotions, and you're with your it was great because it was kind of like a mini celebration to an extent because I got to meet other people from Celebration that I hadn't seen since Celebration, like Alan
Right.
Diaz and Katrina Dennis, and then meet a couple of other people that I hadn't met before, like hey Jorge, like the Damons from Star Wars Explained, and Chase and Brian from Pink Milk. So it was like a homecoming, but then meeting other people. So just in that environment, it was wonderful. But then seeing the actual show and hearing Tony Gilroy and Diego Luna talk about it, it's just mind blowing. And then
Yeah.
obviously you're like I said, you're engineered to enjoy the thing you're watching because of the environment that you're
Right.
in. But afterwards, you go back and you detach yourself from it and say, okay, now let's watch it objectively without all this noise around me. And then when
Mhm.
I rewatched it, I was just like, damn, like this is good.
Yeah.
And it hit on all cylinders for me because I very much like political thrillers and dramas and things of that dark intrigue. So Andor gave me something that I didn't know that I needed, particularly in Star Wars, because it's set Like it took everything we saw from Rogue One, being like the boots on the ground type of storytelling, and just boosted it to like a level that I didn't know Star Wars was going to be brave enough to attempt.
Yeah.
So I really respect the show in that extent. I really respect that Kathy Kennedy trusted Tony Gilroy to give us that story, because she, after the whole Last Jedi backlash and all these things, she could have been like, that's a little too out there for Star Wars. We kind of need to start rolling back up and kind of close ranks and kind of do a little bit of what Mando season 3 did, or a little bit of what
Yeah.
Ahsoka is doing. We can talk how they compare later. For I'm not saying that in a negative way. I'm just saying that
Right. Yeah.
in
Yeah.
terms of like how their story structures tie more traditionally into Star Wars, and the fact that Andor was trusted in its quality to not do that, I think is a testament to how powerful storytelling is. Period. Because I think more Star Wars needs to be brave and not be like Andor. Just be brave in the sense of like trust your story and do your
Right.
story regardless of where it's going to take you. So I know I'm going here like on a rant, but yeah, like Andor kind of did everything, and then to add layers on top of that, you watch it as a Puerto Rican, as a Latino, and then you see like Diego Luna with his accent and being unapologetically Latino in that show, and especially in how he was presented, right, in that first episode, like
Oh
being on
yeah.
the run and like having to have those encounters with the police, and like all these undertones of like current political narratives that are going on like in our day and age, and see that represented unabashedly in that show, which despite what people say that Star Wars is political, we know that's not true, because George Lucas always meant it to be political, but to see it so well represented in this show that really talks about like the Latino experience or Latinx experience to myself and like other people, I thought was a beautiful thing to be able to share that with other Star Wars fans in a new way. Because yeah, we can always share Star Wars and we can always talk about it, but to add that extra layer to say like, hey, I was seen by the show, and like I felt like the show talks about things that like we've been through or our
Yeah.
family have been through or our friends have been through. So yeah, Andor, ride or die, man. I love
Ride
that
or
show.
die. Yeah, no, you make some good points in there, and I want to get into a little bit later. We'll talk about some of the Latinx representation specifically, because I know you've done a couple panels and shows on that already.
Mhm.
So definitely want to hear your voice on that. The one thing that when this show was announced, it stood out to me was there always was this subtext of the Empire's evil, and we got to see it at the highest levels. And in some instances, we may have seen it at 1-2 degrees a little bit lower, but never at this
Mhm.
level, right? We never really got to truly see the impact of like the everyman. That in itself was intriguing to me.
Mhm.
Then you add in the fact that you've got an incredible actor, producer in Diego Luna, who's kind of spearheading all of this. Of course, it came from Rogue One, but
Mhm.
the passion that was there. On top of that, then you get Tony Gilroy, who had he's had a history, a record of doing shows like this, and it really got me. I mean, super excited for all of those reasons, and very much like you, watching the show, it was easy to get caught up in the hype. Coming off
Mhm.
Celebration, watching it, in my little close circles of people that I stayed with, everybody loved this show. But I think objectively, when you look back at the show 1 year later, and I saw this too, I think this reigns true for a lot of people that were disenfranchised with Disney, disenfranchised with Kathleen Kennedy. They were the
Mhm.
Rogue One fans, but they didn't like anything else, right? Everything else was
Mhm. Mhm.
garbage, hot garbage, trash. But there was something about Andor. There was something about Andor that spoke to those people. Now, don't get me wrong. There were still people out there saying, "Oh, I fall asleep. It's boring." Right? We're
Mhm.
gonna have
Mhm.
those
Mhm.
folks. But I was very interested in honestly inspired by the number of people that were anti-Disney that still found something in this show to
Mhm.
hold on
Mhm.
to, even with all of those political undertones. Because
Mhm.
there was the racism. We had
Mhm.
gentrification going on at one
Mhm.
point.
Mhm.
There was ethnocide, all right, with the
Mhm.
Aldanians and what they were
Mhm.
doing to
Mhm.
them. So it covered a really broad spectrum of these like political world issues, like real issues that we deal with, but it still was grounded in Star Wars. For me, it never felt like it was not Star Wars, which I
Mhm.
think is a tribute obviously to everybody involved, whether it's the writing, the directing, the special effects, the props, the costumes, the music. I mean, everything just worked on
Mhm.
another level that we had never seen. Honestly, as far as Star Wars television, although it's a short history, it
Mhm.
just was
Mhm.
it was like another caliber when it came to it.
It's like I agree with everything that you said, but I think to your point, the production design of Andor was something that was particularly special because up until now, like all the shows that we've seen, I mean, animation doesn't count, right?
Right.
For
Yeah,
like this
sure.
type, for this conversation that we're having, but like Mando and Obi-Wan Kenobi, well, actually, yeah, Obi-Wan Kenobi came before.
Yes.
Yeah, it's all volume, right? And I'm not describing the volume. The volume, you can do great things in the volume, but I feel like sometimes, especially up until that point, it's felt that everything was so reliant, right, on like
Hmm.
using like digital productions that it stifled the creativity of like what these productions can be. And I feel that Andor kind of pushed the boundaries there to be like, just because it's Star Wars, just because it's Disney Plus, and just because we have the volume doesn't mean that we have to do that. It's like I always like the Jurassic Park quote. It's like, just because the scientists were worried about whether they can, that they didn't stop to think about whether they should,
Right.
type of thing. And I think that that's what Andor did. It's just like, well, we can do it that way, but does the story call for it? And I think that's the best thing that all these creators coming into Star Wars and anything, right?
Sure.
Marvel,
Yeah.
DC, whatever. It doesn't just specifically apply to Star Wars. It's for everybody. But obviously, we're talking about Star Wars here, so we're making it very specific. It's just like, ask what's the right approach
Yeah.
for the story, and like what's gonna make your story stand out. And I think that not relying on a virtual production for Andor like really did a great service, because the world felt tangible
Huge.
and it felt huge and it felt lived in. And I think that it's a very good credit to like all those designers there, like Michael Wilkinson, and and obviously Doug Chiang, who's always involved in those things, to
Yeah.
be able to make Andor feel different but still inherently Star Wars. Because
Exactly.
Coruscant is like the best example in my mind. Coruscant doesn't look like the Coruscant of the prequels, but it still feels like Coruscant. And
Absolutely.
it's like one
Yeah.
of those like those great dichotomies, I think, of like getting away from the shiny reflective,
Sterile.
Naboo sterile, whatever you want to call it, aesthetic of the prequels. And then now kind of bringing like, no, but how does it feel to everyone else? Which narratively again makes sense, because we're not looking at it from we're not looking at top down, we're looking at bottom up.
Exactly.
So it's a whole new way to recontextualize how Star Wars looks, but also how that story's told. Because like we were mentioning before, the Empire was never really too terrifying, because we always see like extraordinary people
Exactly.
taking down stormtroopers, which is easy when you got a lightsaber and you have the Force. But when you're just some guy, like stormtroopers actually start being terrifying. Like that
Yep.
scene in Aldani when the TIE fighter just flies, across everybody to terrify them, and the screeching of the TIE, it's just like, oh crap, like
Yep.
actually this is a force to be reckoned with if you're a normal person.
Exactly. Yeah. Again, going back to that every man's kind of tale and lens that was used so brilliantly in this series. Just go to the chat real quick. Connor said he felt it was very real, very dark, and not the Senate building shot, of course. But yeah, it was, and we'll get into some of that here as the story progresses. But you kind of already talked about the production. I want to ask you something, because I know you were able to also partake in a series of roundtable interviews, and I think you guys had people on there like Bo Willimon, who's
Yep.
one of the writers. You had executive producer Sane
Sana
Wallenberg.
Wallenberg.
She's
Sana
German, I
Wallenberg.
think. I forget. I can't ever say
Yes.
her first name.
Yep.
And then you had Nicholas Brittle, the composer, on as
Yep.
well. So,
Yep. Yep.
what was that experience like for you? And then I guess, was there anything like you? I guess a big takeaway from that you learned that kind of opened your eyes about the production of it.
Eh, I mean, it's surreal, right? To like you're saying that, and like I'm like, oh crap, yeah,
That
that did
was me.
happen. It's one of those things. It's one of those things, and I think it's particularly pertinent to talk about it today, because today's the anniversary of the Lucasfilm purchase by Disney. And like I like to think of myself way back when that happened, and like being, I think I don't either I was like starting grad school or finish, well, whatever. I was in college, in some part of my college life, and being with my friends at my best friend's house and just talking about Star Wars and what we expect for Star Wars during with the Disney acquisition. Like obviously they're gonna do episode 7. What's episode 7 gonna look like? And thinking about like that guy just sitting with his best friends talking about Star Wars and speculating about the future of Star Wars, and then fast forward 8, 9
Yep.
years and be like, oh wait, I was talking to Bo Willimon and like all these people that were like the creators of like this show that like is amazing and means a lot to us. It's surreal. It's
Yeah.
surreal.
Yeah.
And then it was, I mean, I have to make the caveat and say that like we wasn't one-to-one interviews, they were round tables.
Yeah.
So we were with a bunch of other amazing creators. So again, like to be, in these backstage rooms with, like Talking Bay 94 and Star Wars Explained and Acto Radio and like all these awesome people and just talking and all of us being like, wait, are we actually talking to these people? is an experience that I will definitely cherish for the rest of my life.
I'm
And
happy
if
for you, man.
nothing ever happens with my Star Wars podcasting life, I'll forever be grateful that
Yeah.
this happened. Uh, that being said, though, I think like the thing that captures me the most and is not necessarily like any tidbit, right, of like how things are created, because it's fun facts are fun facts and that's awesome. But
Sure.
it's to see the passion that all of these people have and like how they approach the problem, right, of storytelling and how everyone approaches it in a very individual way. And particularly, oh my god, I'm forgetting his name. Not Michael Wilkinson. He was the one of the costume designers, but the production designer. I'm blanking out on his name. Like it was
Oh.
interesting because like I was asking him about precisely what we were talking about in terms of how Coruscant was designed. Because I'm an architect, so the minute that I see Coruscant in Andor, I'm just like, oh, that's brutalist architecture. That's this building. That's that building.
Yeah.
And it's just like you're kind of starting to connect the dots. And I had a very visceral, emotional reaction to the design of how Coruscant looked. So, when I'm asking him, I'm just like, oh,
Exactly.
well, how did you approach it? Because this is the things that I picked up on. And, his answer was very, very, very nonchalant to an extent. It's just like, well, you kind of answered your own question. So it's very interesting to see that. It's just like to see that that the creatives like are sometimes infusing the things that we see as fans, and that they approach things in a similar fashion. Just like
Mhm.
what's going to be the most poignant thing that means something and contributes to the story and has emotion to it. Because we can see, and I like to use Coruscant a lot because of how it's presented in different ways in different media, because it's giving you you're supposed to feel something different. And I think that feeling is the best word I have right now for like these stories, because especially now with the SAG strike, is we're fighting for humans. It's like all these
Exactly.
AI storytelling and like having computers write things. It's like there's something obviously that would be lost in that arena of like not of us not being able to tell the stories that we want, because only humans can feel human emotions, right?
Right.
And I think that like all these stories are imbued with all of that, and it's not just the acting, it's not just the actors, it's not just the writers, but like everything around the world that's built by all these awesome people that I was able to talk to. They want to inject that, and
Yeah.
like every
Yeah.
single little detail that you see is supposed to heighten that story by making you feel a particular way about the scenes that you're seeing. And like with the music procession, Nicholas Bertel was mentioning all those things, like how like the musical theme evolves in all the different episodes to be telling the story of how Andor is evolving and how it crescendos into the funerary march for Marva, which, spoiler alert, but if you haven't seen it in a year,
Right. Yeah.
sorry.
Sorry.
But it's awesome to like hear them talk about all these things and like see how their subjective thoughts on like all these story elements really contribute to make something that's really poignant. Because
Yeah.
sometimes it feels that we're with all the stories that we watch and films that we watch, sometimes it feels like they're very assembly line. It's just like, well, these are the things that we need to do, and like, there's ingredients that we need to incorporate into all these elements so that we can just pump those out. And it's something that we can capture as viewers. It's just like, oh, it feels manufactured. But Andor really felt, like a labor of love, of
Right.
people that really cared about making something that was great and that would resonate with all of us.
Yeah, and very bold in their approach. I think
Mhm.
in listening to those interviews, and I listened to them when they came out. I haven't had a chance to go back to, but I remember my takeaway from those interviews with all of them, really.
Mhm.
And I only listed a couple. There were other folks, like you said, the costume producer, designer was on there. There was a number of other folks that were a part of
Mhm,
these
mhm.
roundtable interviews. But the one thing that I walked away with, it's so easy for us as fans of just media in general, but specifically in Star Wars, it feels more real. But we're so
Mhm,
quick to say checking boxes, or like you said, they have a script or it's an assembly line, right?
mhm,
And
mhm,
it's very clear when you listen to these interviews with all the creatives behind this series in particular that it was a very conscious decision for everything, regardless if it's the casting and the writing, the
mhm, mhm,
situations, the undertones that they were trying to make you feel uncomfortable with, right? And grounding that in reality. Those are all very conscionable decisions. In even with that opening scene, I don't want to steal my thunder, but later on, I wanted to kind of talk about what were some of the big standout moments that have kind of held up. And I
mhm,
think that opening scene, honestly,
mhm,
everything
mhm,
from the moment that music starts, and then we get the logo, it
mhm.
sets the tone, right? And then by the time we get into that first shot where we're seeing the lights overhead, and then it
Yeah.
pans over and we get the behind the shot with Luna, or I'm sorry, Cassian with the hood on, and he's walking
Mhm.
in the rain. It is so like there's a vision that was there. It's clear there was a vision from the very beginning on this thing. And I'm not taking anything away from other media and not taking anything away from other Star Wars shows or television series, but there's just something about this one that felt like it was, again, very purposeful. There was a vision that started with Tony Gilroy, and they executed on every single one of these aspects and gave us an incredible, incredible show that I think is going to hold up. To answer the question,
Yeah.
hold up for years and years to come. It's timeless in that way.
Yeah, I think that's the strength of the show, which I think it's comparable to Mandalorian season 1 in that regard. Like it's a show that stands on its own and it's still inherently Star Wars, but it's just good. It's a good story
Yeah,
regardless of Star Wars.
right.
And I think that's something that is good for like any franchise in general. It's just like make the story that's just good, and then and then you can like worry about the world around it and within it, which I think Andor's credit, I think that's the great thing of having had Tony Gilroy be
Yeah,
the showrunner. And again, like I think showrunners are very important because look
of
at
course.
kind of what's going on with Marvel now. Like none of the shows have showrunners, and it's kind of you can see that like there's no cohesive vision for like a lot of the shows. Loki's the exception, and not to say that the shows are necessarily bad, but you
I
can
get
tell
what
that
you're
there's
saying. Yeah, no, you're right. You're right.
there's no intentional direction.
Yeah,
But Andor, like Tony Gilroy had a very specific vision, and he was able to, like shepherd shepherd the crew in a powerful way, which I
right.
think, in my opinion, was a detriment to Mando season 2 and season 3, and we'll talk about that I think a little later. But I feel like some of the other Star Wars shows have lost that, like forward vision that Andor had in a very strong way.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Let's move on. I want to talk about just kind of recap. And there a total of 12 episodes, as we all know. There was, they had some incredible writers, incredible directors as part of the series. Diego Luna was nominated for Best
Mhm,
Actor in a Drama Series. I think he lost to this up and coming actor by the name of Kevin Costner, I think is his name.
mhm,
I mean, good luck to that
mhm.
kid, right? But and then you look at like the Rotten Tomatoes rating for what that's worth. I mean, people, you may not hold that up with any value or whatever, but I think by and large, I think what the trend is that this series was well received by
Mhm.
critics across the board. And so I guess maybe going back to that question, I think you've already answered it, but I just kind of want to hear it maybe again. What do you think it is about this series that, again, it resonated with so many people, and especially the folks that were just kind of, again, disenfranchised or lost in terms of their love for Star Wars and specifically the Kathleen Kennedy era of Star Wars?
I think it's a very good question because I think it's an interesting way to approach it. And sometimes for us, and when I say us, I mean like us, content creators or
Yeah,
uber Star Wars fan or social media star, like whatever you want to call us, who are like in the Star Wars world a lot. I think that sometimes we get our visors and we lose focus of how we are perceiving Star Wars and how we are watching it. And sometimes it's important to see that like we're a minority. you
yeah,
know
for sure. Oh
the
yeah,
the
I
the
say it all the
maj-
time.
the majority of people that are like watching Marvel or Star Wars or DC or whatever Lord of the Rings, whatever franchise or whatever movie or show, they're they're not, they don't care
They're
who
not
made
doing
it.
podcasts on Monday night
They
the
are
day
not
before
doing
Halloween.
podcasts. Exactly, or recording on Halloween
Or
tomorrow.
recording on Halloween. Yeah, there you go. That's
Uh,
hardcore.
they don't care for the most part. They don't know who's the director, who's the president of the company that made it. They just want to be entertained. They just want to like watch something and be there for a good time. And I feel that that's why it's hard to qualify it as a fan, because like you see it differently. And
Exactly.
we
Yeah.
and I mean, I don't want to talk for all Star Wars fans, but I feel like a lot of the big problem with our fandom is that we're we kind of feel like it belongs to us,
Yes. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we grew up with it. Like there's a sense of ownership that is false, right? That we have that, like, because we've loved it forever and we've seen it and we engage with it in a very personal way, that we are the arbiters of like what is or isn't the show, or what is or not
Is Star
good.
Wars. Yeah.
And I think that in that regard, and part of my French, we have to like get our heads out of our asses from that, because that's not a healthy way to look at any media. We have to like evaluate it on its own merits. And I think Andor is kind of a testament of that, because it's a show that will stand the test of time. I can guarantee that, just like The Last Jedi will, as well as like shows and movies that like had a very strong idea of what they were going to be, just like The Empire Strikes Back was in 1980, and they were confident and unapologetic for it. And I think that those are the types of stories that survive and that like make an impact, and that people will will gravitate towards. So I don't
Yeah.
know if that was the actual question, but that's my answer.
Yeah, no, and I agree. Like we've said it so many times, especially with Star Wars, if you tell a good story, people are going to come. If you build it, they will
Mhm.
come, right? And if you objectively look at this, again, like you said, most of these folks are Star Wars fans. You ask them, they'll tell you, I'm a Star Wars fan, but they're
Mhm.
not listening to podcasts, right? They're
No.
not doing their own creator content. They're not subscribed to 8 million Twitter feeds all giving you the same story when it launches
Right,
within 3
right.
seconds, but they are fans. And this is a series that I feel like had that broad appeal, right?
Mhm.
It was a way for people to experience Star Wars in a different way. There was a
Mhm,
level of
mhm, mhm,
escapism that I don't think has been matched so far, maybe with the Ahsoka series because we literally went to
mhm,
another galaxy. But
mhm,
that
mhm.
level of escapism that comes with good media and good television or good books or whatever it is, we all kind of want that. We crave that inherently as human beings, and I
Mhm.
think this series did a really good job in delivering on a lot of different fronts. I mean, it was kind of varied. It wasn't just the same, thing happening in all 12
Right.
episodes. We were kind of bouncing around the galaxy. We got to see some real character development for Cassian and a number of other characters through the series. So, a lot of great stuff that was pumped into this. Now, as part of, I guess I would call the homework assignment, we were supposed to watch it all again. I watched it
Mhm.
twice. I wasn't expecting to. I watched it once and went, man, I got to watch it again because I just took notes and it had been a year, of course. But I guess for you, what were some of the things that you, as part of the rewatch, stood out for you that maybe either, held up better, the same, or maybe things that didn't hold up as well?
I mean, I think for me, like, it's the experience of the crescendo of the show. Like, I think some people may, sure, let's throw them a bone and say rightfully say that the show is boring. I wouldn't say it's boring. I feel like it's intentional, like it's developing its drama. Because yeah, the show does start out slow. Slow is not inherently bad,
Right.
but I think it's very purposeful, and I think that's one of the things that I enjoy about how it builds on it, because it's a pressure cooker, and and you feel it like every episode, like you feel like there's a bomb that's gonna go off. And I
Yeah.
feel that the last arc particularly really paid that off. It stuck the landing for me, because you have like all these like I know it's cliche, but like had like those four speeches that just wait, Nemec, uh,
You
Andy
got
Circus,
Luthen.
Yeah, four. There we go. That hit and hit for different reasons, and like did different things that for me like really paid off the the thesis of the show, right? Because each
Hmm.
character was making like their statement of what the show is about from those different points of view that Cassian needs to navigate through. So it's one of those things that I every once in a while come back to. It's just like listening to like those speeches, because they're so powerful. It's like,
Yeah.
so not just because they're well written or well performed. Which, speaking about like people that got snubbed for awards, like Stellan Skarsgård,
Stellan Skarsgård. Yep.
it's like oh my god, I forgot.
Andy
Uh,
Serkis too.
no, I know. Marva. Oh my god, I'm blanking out
Oh yeah,
on her name.
I'm trying to think of her name now, but yeah, she's sure her speech was great too. Oh God, what was her name? Fiona Shaw. Fiona
Fiona
Shaw.
Shaw. There. Thank you. Oh my god, the fact that like specifically like she and Stellan Skarsgård didn't get like a best supporting actor, and I was personally offended, and even though like all these shows or these award
Right.
shows are rigged anyway, but yeah, for me like the ending like of the show with like all those moments of speeches are just like gave me goosebumps the first time that I watched it, and to this day, like I rewatch it, it's still like there's power like in all those words. Which again, like the WGA strike just ended, but it's a testament to the power of writers that they can give us like these moments that like make us feel so much. And it's one of those things that was frustrating during all the months that the writer strike was going on, to see like all these powerful creatives that make our stories and craft the worlds that we love, and not see them get the respect that they've earned and deserve by corporate heads that don't do anything except count money and sit on their ass. But like like all
Yeah.
these people that actually make these create these worlds and not get their fair due. It's really unfair, especially when you rewatch a show like Andor and see what's capable of coming from like these minds. So
Yeah, yeah, and there's some questions that are coming in the chat about what we expect to see. We're going to actually cover that here in a little bit, looking ahead to season 2. So I'm holding off. I see your questions. You are seeing. Don't worry, I will come back to those here in just a little bit. I think I would agree. Like the speeches in the writing, just in general, right across the board, is phenomenal, beginning to end. And we've got a couple of creators behind. I think there were 3 writers total that were behind that. Of course, the Gilroy brothers and Willimon, I think, was in there as well. But so that's an amazing effort that was put into that. But those 4 speeches in particular, they almost transcend the show. I hate to say that, it sounds cheesy and cliche, but there's something about those that we're able to relate to, and these are all coming from very different characters, very disparate in terms of what their backgrounds are, but there's something relatable about that, right? And you can even take like Luthans, right? And how many memes did we see about that's the speech I give when I go to work every day? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's just something very primal about these speeches at the core.
I mean,
that
how do you write that?
resonates.
Like, I've made my mind a sunless space. I share my dreams with the ghosts. Like, how do
Yeah,
you not write? How do you write that and not pat yourself on the back?
exactly.
It's like, oh my god,
It's
so
poetic.
good. Yeah, it
Poetic.
is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, all of those speeches are great. I've always everything about the show, I think, it really stood up for me. It stood very well. The music was a great change. I think storyline. I think the writers did a good job of subverting expectations a number of times, and we felt like we were kind of right when we thought we knew how things were going to go. We get, a hard left, and then it's a hard right, and then we come back and circle back to where we started. And so there was something very promising and fulfilling about coming full circle, having subverted expectations a number of times in the series. There's one particular one, and this one's a very personal thing for me that stood out. And again, I'm going to go back to that first kind of opening sequence, those opening scenes when, the guards are harassing them, right? You can hear them in the background. And they start talking about, hey, did you swim over? Right. And living in Texas and being called a wetback most of my life from people that were just horrible people. Not everybody, of course, but, the really bad people, that's just a slur that would be thrown at us all the time because so many of people in Texas and even my relatives came over across the border. We swam or did whatever we could to. But it's little things like that I just really, really appreciate that message is getting out there and people are hearing that kind of talk, because whether you take this as simply purely fictional and a space opera and all that, there are those underlying tones of reality that this whole story is drenched in. That's just one of many, many examples. I think we've already talked about a few at the very beginning of the show. But for me, and especially for my family, that was one that I was like, wow, this is something completely different. Something that I would expect, to see maybe in HBO series or Showtime or whatever, but not getting something like this and then having the Star Wars label on it and then feeling like Star Wars. I mean, don't get me wrong. It feels like Star Wars because of Star Wars and not in spite of Star Wars, right? If that makes any sense. So,
Yeah.
all in all, this whole series has a lot of great moments, but it'd be remiss not to say that some of the best moments were definitely those speeches that we heard from all four of those characters. Is there anything else? Was there anything that maybe didn't you felt like didn't work the second time around or a year later?
Eh, well, it's something because I want to piggyback on what you were talking about how what the show kind of did for representation, especially representation in Star Wars. I mean, we've known that Star Wars hasn't been the bastion of
Exactly.
representation.
Right.
Hasn't It's been very very lacking in that department for a while, and it's been very slow to turn the tide there, which Star Trek is doing miles miles better than what Star Wars has been able to do. But Andor was really special for that reason. And it's interesting because when you look at where Star Wars is now, three of the big leads of like all Star Wars media right now are Latinx.
Right.
We have
Yep.
Pedro Pascal, we have Diego Luna, and then we have Rosario Dawson. But Pedro Pascal is behind the helmet. He doesn't have like his natural accent, and he's in like the whole mythological Western story. So
Mhm.
even though we can look and talk about diaspora and all these things, it's still it's still not coded in a straightforward way for like us to be able to look at it and say like, oh, I'm seeing myself.
Right.
Same
Right.
with Rosario. I mean, she's taking over a character and she's in makeup, and it's much more Star Wars coded than Andor is. So despite them kind of being Latinx leads, they're kind of not telling the Latinx story, and maybe not necessarily by design, but necessarily because of the types of stories that they're a part of. And it's even more interesting because for me, as a Puerto Rican, I feel like sometimes like our community, like not Puerto Rican community, like the Latinx community is, I don't want to say shunned, but ignored. So I feel like when there's Hispanic Heritage Month, there's like awareness that needs to happen for any of the different causes for any of our homelands that happen. I feel like we're like, oh yeah,
Yep. We'll get to you at some point.
like yeah, never mind. There's like other people that are more important, which isn't to say that other people aren't
Exactly. Yeah. I
important.
get what you're
But I
saying.
feel
Yep.
like, but for us, it's like, yeah, you guys are okay. And it's just like, well, you've been saying that for decades, and like us being okay means that we're always kind of like, you know, kind of an afterthought to an extent. And that's kind of how, to an extent, I felt up until Andor. So it's like, yeah, we have like all these characters that are there, but putting them behind a mask, putting makeup on them, not letting them tell their story. And then Andor comes in as unapologetic.
Exactly.
And for me, it was very powerful because when when Diego Luna was cast as Cassian in Rogue One, it didn't have the impact for me that it did for a lot of people. And I'll tell you why. Because because I'm in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is the oldest colony in the world. We've been colonized by American culture for so long that, in a way, like, it's normalized how we see media, right? So
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
me as a Puerto Rican, I always grew up watching TV in English, and like watching Star Wars and watching white male heroes that look like white Americans is normal, right? So like
Yeah.
for me, it's just, like it got so normal that you're desensitized to it that you don't even realize that you're not being represented. So it took me a while, honestly, like to I was already in my 30s, right, when like Rogue One happened. I don't know, what is time anyway. But when that was happening, like it didn't click for me, like how consequential it was to particularly have Diego talking in his normal accent.
Accent. Yeah.
And like when I saw that interview with, I don't know if it was like Diego mentioned it or someone else was telling the story of like that like that I think it was like a father and daughter or something like that, or father and son, that like finally said like, oh, like I saw someone that talks like me or talks like my dad, something like that. And Diego saying that like, yeah, that was what I wanted to do, like finally have a character that speaks like like our people do. And to see that the impact that created on other people kind of like kind of unlocked that part of my brain. So like I'm very thankful for the show in that regard, to like make me be like, oh, you're right, like
Yeah.
we aren't in stories, and when we are in those stories, we're not the heroes of the story either. So and when we are the heroes, we're not telling the story like from our point of view. So in that regard, I think Andor was particularly special. The one criticism I did have of it was, and it has to do with Diego's accent. It was an interview that Tony Gilroy was doing, and then he said like, well, one of the reasons that I wanted to come back to tell the story of this character was because we needed to explain why does he talk like that? Why does he have that accent? And I'm like, bro, like Tony, like you were hitting 1,000, and now you struck out with that comment. Like, because I was just like, wait, why do we need to explain our accent? Like, we talk like that because we talk like that. Like, right? Like, do Americans need to explain their accents? Like, no. It's like, wait, so that's, and obviously it's not part of the show. It's just like a behind the scenes thing that I'm just like, oh, like our like the inherent biases that people have that they don't even realize that they have, and suddenly they say like kind of came to the front, which I found particularly interesting. And in a way, it's a thing that I'm thankful for the show, because it's putting those things out there and it's creating those conversations that otherwise we might not be having.
Yeah. I shared as much on this show before when the show was announced. You know, Rogue One was a character that people in my family, especially my father, he's the one that introduced me to Star Wars. And you know, he's kind of been one of these fans that we've talked about where he's not listening to he's not watching my podcast. I'll tell you that right now. But you know, he was a Star Wars fan. But the fact that, you know, when we had Jimmy Smits, and you know, that guy threw the entire prequel trilogy on his you know, like Latinx shoulders for the longest time there. But growing up, I don't think people realize it, and maybe they do. I think more people are more open to the idea and understand where I think people of color are coming from. But it is one thing to go up there. Growing up, Luke Skywalker was my hero. 100% Luke Skywalker was my hero. I wanted to be him, and I didn't see color. But when you have a character that is of the same color, that has an accent like my family does, I don't obviously, but people that have accents like that, and you relate to that, there's a different level of connection, right? It's a different level of connection. And it was so apparent in my father when he found out Diego Luna was being cast. And the number of my other family, like I have some close relatives that are huge Diego Luna fans. And they watch all of his Mexican movies, all his television series. And when he got cast, suddenly they were Star Wars fans, right? There was now that inclusiveness that had not really been there, right? They breached that by bringing somebody like him and not allowing him to be who he is, right? Being able to be relatable to a whole broad spectrum of new audience members that had never really, I mean, it was just Star Wars, right? But it wasn't, they weren't connecting on that personal level. So it does mean a lot. And I would agree that there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. But I do applaud the Kathleen Kennedys and the Tony Gilroys and the Diego Lunas for taking these first steps right into a much larger world, if not to coin a popular phrase here. But we've got a lot of ground to cover, and it's just, I don't know, it bodes well. Like, it's super exciting. I was absolutely over the moon when the series was announced, and then just on top of, after everything we've already talked about, as good as it is, it just feels like I feel selfish. Like, I feel like, wow, we've got like an incredible series, and arguably the best series in Star Wars is now being led by a national from Mexico, right? Where my family's from. That's huge. It's a very proud moment when this series came out, and I think it's going to continue to be when we get into season 2.
It's special, and it's something that like means a lot, and it's something that like I hope that we're able to feel more often, because I remember I was feeling kind of the same with the sequel trilogy and having Oscar Isaac there, but then all of a sudden Rise of Skywalker pulled that 180 on us, and they made him a drug dealer. And it's like, oh man, like, dude, come on.
Yeah, falling back in. Yeah,
it's just like, why do we need to like code him back to like? It's like one of those things that I'm not 100% sure, but I'm 90% sure that when JJ and Chris Terrio were writing that they didn't think that, oh well, Oscar Isaac is a Latino man, and there's a coding of like Latino man as drug dealers. I'm sure that they weren't thinking about that.
Right.
But the fact that is something that they didn't think across, and no one else like raised a red flag to be like, oh, maybe we shouldn't perpetuate negative stereotypes, and then that just happened. It kind of not disenfranchised me, just disappointed me with the sequel trilogy, because it's like, come on, you didn't have to do us dirty. He's already like, he's not one of the big, he's with the lowest of the big three right now. You didn't have to do him dirty after you built him up already. So to see like those mistakes not being perpetuated in Andor is a breath of fresh air for sure.
Yeah, they got. I don't know if it did anything for you. Did you ever read Free Fall by
No, I
Segura?
didn't, but I read that he bent over backwards to try to,
Yeah,
reconciliate like
yeah,
that bombshell after everything that was established already in the
uh,
Poe Dameron comics.
yeah. It was an interesting read. That dude had a impossible task on his shoulders, but good on him for writing that book. So. All right, let's in the time that we got left here, I want to look ahead. Let's look ahead to season 2. So we know that shooting started November of 2022.
Hmm.
They're tentatively scheduled. I think by all accounts, it's still shooting for some fall winter release of 2024. That could be up in the air at this point
Hmm.
because of the strikes, right? We know they're not going to go do a press junket without the actors. And so
Hmm.
every day that passes is just another day we probably should be tacking on to that tentative release for this series and all the other Star Wars and all the other television series, just to be honest. But the interesting thing about season 2 is we've got 12 episodes and they're doing chunks of 3 episodes, and
Hmm.
every 3 episodes is going to be a year for a total of 4 years, leading right into the events of Rogue One. How do you feel about that change? Right, it seems it's very different. I mean, you could the season 1 did have, they were kind of encapsulated. They were
Arcs,
kind of
yeah.
mini stories and arcs, but it was a very interesting that they went consciously trying to go a year at a time with pockets of 3 episodes. How do you feel about that? Do you like the idea?
I mean, I'm not sure about it, but like I said at the beginning, like I've been skeptical in the past and with diminishing returns. So like I think I trust like the Tony and the cast and crew to be confident in what they're doing, and if this is the best way that they feel that this story is going to be told, then let's see,
I think they've earned
because
it too,
and
honestly.
they've
I
earned
mean,
it
they've totally
100%.
earned it. Right.
And I don't remember how many seasons Andor was supposed to be. I think it was supposed to be 5 or something like that. And
Exactly.
then
Originally. Yep.
Tony decided that 2 would be better. And honestly, like, hey, I prefer a lean series that like tells the story the right way than a show that kind of drags on and then like you're kind of like, okay, it's time to kill it. I rather it end on its own terms. So so we'll see. Like I have no reason to believe that it's not going to be of the highest quality and like tell the story in the way that it needs to be told.
Yeah.
So,
And I'm with you. Like everybody's coming back, all the actors, all the producers. I mean, it's the same crew.
mhm.
We don't know how much, if anything, this whole strike has played into a lot of that. I know Gilroy was on the hot seat there for a while because he was still
Mhm.
kind of doing some writing when the writer strike was going on. But, I don't think
You're a writer, you got to write.
yeah, you got to write. Whether you officially announce it or not is a whole
Right.
different conversation. But yeah, I mean, we'll have to see if any of that really impacts it. But again, like we said, they've earned it. I don't expect this series to kind of falter in that way. And just quickly, kind of segueing into our next question here, which is I want to go back to some of the comments and some of the questions for season 2. I think there were certainly a lot of threads that were built up, and we were kind of left hanging there at the very end. But this series had a number of threads that were introduced earlier on in the series that we
Mhm.
never really got closure to, or we never got maybe really fulfilling answers to, that I think people are still holding on to. And one of the ones I want to go to is Jorge's question about, do you think we'll ever see Cassian? Will Cassian ever find his sister? This is the one that for me is like, I need to know this because you think about, and it's true of all cultures and races. I'm not saying anything, but for my particular family is such a huge component, right?
Mhm.
The idea of family and who you belong to and blood being thicker than water kind of thing. I loved when this was introduced, and we didn't really, it kind of, the trail went cold for all the right
Mhm.
reasons,
Mhm.
and we know why exactly. But I guess stuff like that. Are you interested in seeing, do you hope they explore that in season 2? And then just in general, what are some of the other things that you're looking forward to going into season 2?
Well, like at Star Wars Celebration London this year, they did show us a trailer for season 2, and there's hints to some of the questions that I see on the chat. So like I don't know how much into the spoilers of those we want to get into, even though honestly like the trailer wasn't story heavy. It was just
A lot of shots.
visuals
Yep.
of the characters that we're going to see. So just putting that out there.
Right.
In regards to Cassian's sister, I have mixed feelings about that because while I do want to know the answer to that, even though Marva alleges that he won't find her because
Right.
X
Because
or
she's
Y
gone.
reason.
Yep.
Uh, I'm mixed. I'm on the fence about it because we only have the one season left, and like the story is already so jam packed
Dense. Yeah.
that I'm just like, can we afford to have like more story? And would it distract from like the forward momentum that Andor currently has.
Mhm.
So I'm not saying I'm against it. I'm just like worried that that's just in this super compressed season, if that's something that's able to be brought in at this point. And
Yeah.
I don't want to put my foot in my mouth and then say it's not going to happen, and then it's the first episode and they find her there.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah, it's okay. This is we do this on the show all the time. We put our foot in our mouth and shove it down our throat. So I'll go on record as saying I would like to see them explore this again for selfish reasons, but there's something like really cruel and unjust about him finding her at the very end of the series and saying, again, this is headcanon, I'm just making this up, but him talking to his sister for the first time and saying, well, I got,
I
I'm
have
over
to
here. I need to
go.
head
Yeah.
over to do this real quick, and when we come back, we'll get caught up. And then he leaves, and then that goes into Rogue One. I mean, just add to even put them on the beach together. Like that's where they met. And so now that resonates a little bit more at the very end of Rogue One, when he's
Mhm.
on the beach there with someone that, that's not in love with, but well, I think he was. But yeah, I mean, I think there's things that they could do like that would add a lot of weight to it. But you're right. It's going to be a very condensed and dense series, given that we're doing 3-episode arcs for 12
Mhm.
episodes. I just don't know if they're going to have time for that. It's certainly something they could explore in other media. Maybe, they do
Yeah.
a book or something like that. That's another option that they could have.
I mean, I do
But
like
yeah,
that idea of them meeting like right at the end, serendipitously, not because he's looking for her, but because she like
exactly.
somehow life brought them together. And I do like the tragedy of like them meeting and kind of being like, oh, let's catch up over coffee when I come back, and then he never comes back because
Never comes
that's
back.
life and that's war, and that's this type of show. So like, I wouldn't,
Exactly. Right.
I wouldn't like, I don't know if we'll have time for that, but if we did, I think that would make total sense to me to have it done that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Sam chimed in and said, just finished a rewatch of Andor, and wow, so many amazing things in this. Will we see Saul next season? And will Mon Mothma get a haircut next season? That's the
Yes
real
and
question,
no.
guys. That's why I brought you on here. Yes and no.
Yes and no.
I think we're going to see Saul. I think we're going to see him.
We
He's such an integral
I can
part.
I can guarantee that.
Well, yeah. If you've seen some footage of the trailer, then I think that's probably safe to say, honestly. Let's see. I want to just go highlight some other chats here that I've already done. But Andor is the highest quality Star Wars content ever made, and I love the original trilogy and quite liked the prequels. That's from
Mhm.
Icona23. KG said Andor is my favorite Star Wars content to date. And then Ron said every single character is great, literally. So
That's
thank you
true.
guys for contributing. I don't disagree with anything that was said there. Um, so what else? Is there anything like going back to kind of maybe wrap up here, bringing in like the politics or the ethnical undertones, anything in there that you feel like needs to be done in season 2, or do you feel like we're not going to have that same runway that we probably need to kind of flesh those out in any meaningful way?
I think it's you hit the nail on the head on that. I don't think we're gonna have too much time to delve into those things very in depth as we kind of did with season 1, just because we're on a ticking clock. Like I feel like if season 1 was a pressure cooker that's building to explode, season 2 is gonna be a ticking time bomb.
Exactly. Yep.
So it's gonna be a lot faster paced because we have to get to Rogue One, and I feel like it's gonna be neck break speed. So like I'm not sure that at that pace that we'll have the time that we did before to kind of devote it to. I'm sure that we'll have moments of
Sure.
like that,
Yep.
but
Yep.
I think it's gonna be like in a little more haste than
Yeah.
than season 1. Hopefully,
And
I'm wrong.
yeah, hopefully. I'd love for you to be wrong, but I think you're right. And I think honestly, if we had gotten like the 5 seasons, then I can see, yeah, they probably had a lot of room to stretch and kind of explore a lot of those stories. But
Mhm.
in this condensed time frame that we're looking at for season 2, I don't expect them to kind of go in and do much there. So it still be there. It'll be there, but just
Mhm.
not as heavy handed as it was in the first season.
Yeah.
All right. Who's Andor made for? I threw this question out there. Is it something that you would sell? Like, let's say someone came up to you and said, hey, man, I heard you have a podcast. I've kind of been thinking about getting into Star Wars. Is this the first series that you would recommend to somebody?
I mean, that's a loaded question because I feel that it's not a binary question,
Yeah,
right? In
right,
the
right.
sense that it's for everybody, because Star Wars isn't for everybody, like
Exactly.
there's a universal appeal to the original trilogy, and the prequel trilogy is starting to get that universal appeal now because of its nostalgia and and our distance from it from when it came out.
Mhm.
But Star Wars is very niche in a way. It's for sci-fi fantasy nerds, and I feel that it's one of those things that like I always like to preface with the person that I'm talking with. It's just like, well, what type of things do you like?
Yeah,
Because, for
right.
example, now with Ahsoka too, it's just like, well, if you like high fantasy, then maybe you want to start through Ahsoka, or if you like westerns, maybe start with Mandalorian. If you like political thrillers, start with Andor.
Yeah.
So, like, I feel that's the great thing that Star Wars is starting to do is like diversify their portfolio about what Star Wars can be, so that it has like a wider appeal for people, so that
Yeah.
there's a different type of Star Wars for everyone. Just like with the books, you got your YA, you got your adult novels, you got like your um, um like your younger reader books. So like there's different story avenues for different types I mean, there's people that I see online that just prefer Star Wars publishing. There's
Right.
people that prefer Star Wars animation. So it's very eye opening, right? Because before starting the podcast and before being on social media, like in my mind, it's just like, well, everyone just watches the original trilogy, and then you watch the prequels, and then if you have some juice left, and then you go into the books
Yeah.
and whatever.
Right.
But I remember Star Wars Celebration Anaheim, I think it was. I started to, or Orlando, one of the two. I started to meet people that were like, no, my first foray into Star Wars was Star Wars Rebels, and
Oh,
like that's
wow.
that's and that's my Star Wars, and I'm like,
Yeah.
oh
Yeah.
crap, like it blew my mind, right? To be like, oh crap, there isn't one way to do this, and there is no right way. It's just like whichever Star Wars is the one that you connect with is your Star Wars, and you're as much of a valuable fan of the franchise as if you had started like me with the original trilogy. So to that end, who do I think Andor is for? I think Andor is for everybody, but I think if it's not your flavor, then there's a different flavor of Star Wars waiting for you somewhere. Maybe they haven't made it yet. Maybe it's gonna be the Acolyte. Maybe
Right.
it's gonna be Skeleton Crew. So I think that's the exciting thing of Star Wars right now. That
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
we're becoming Baskin Robbins. We're getting our 31 flavors, and there's gonna be one for everybody.
Exactly.
Hopefully. I mean,
Hopefully.
people
Yeah.
will still complain about it, but what would a Star Wars fan be without complaining?
It wouldn't be a fandom for Star Wars if people weren't
Exactly.
complaining. And I would agree. Like when the Disney acquisition happened, when it was announced, I remember I said something very controversial and took a lot of heat for it. But I said that it felt like Star Wars was at the point where it outgrew what George Lucas was doing. And that's not to
Mhm.
take anything away from Lucas, but we were starting to see these pockets of fandom, these sub pockets and sub pockets of fandom starting to pop up. And it
Mhm.
meant that, okay, we may need to be broad in this. We're going to have to broaden this now because
Mhm.
people were latching on to these things. And so, would there be room? I mean, we were talking about this back in 2015. Would we ever see anything like this where there wasn't four lightsabers and we didn't have, Jedi running around amok? It was really
Mhm.
about the
Mhm.
everyman tale and the horrible iron fists of the Empire, right? Would
Mhm.
that be compelling? Is it intriguing? And yes, the answer is there are a ton of people that want to see that. And there are a lot of people that are like, that doesn't feel like Star Wars to me. Like, that's not
Mhm.
Star Wars, right? There's no force, there's no lightsabers. So, how can you call this Star Wars? And we have to remember that Star Wars has gotten to the point where now it is so many different things to so many different people, depending on
Mhm.
what you're going in for, it's generational now
Mhm.
in a lot
Mhm.
of ways. The media, the formats, the storytelling. I mean, all of this stuff kind of plays into it. It's just, and I feel like with Disney, as like love them or hate them, there were a few companies that can honestly do this, right? Execute
Mhm.
on presenting Star Wars in a lot of different ways to a lot of different new folk. And I think they did a good job. And this is a
Mhm.
really great case in point here with the Andor series. All right, last question. If you had to rank these guys, like if all the live action series that we've had so far, how would you rank those?
I mean,
Or how does
and
this hold up to the rest of them? How about
and
that?
this is, and I think this is like the tricky question
It
sometimes
is.
when we do like these rankings, is that people get take them personal
Right.
and make it feel like it's, oh well, if this one is your top and this one is your bottom, it means that you don't like the bottom, or that this is like inherently better than your number two. And I don't see it that way, because like just because I may like one more than another, I can still see the value of like a lot of these other shows, regardless of like where they might fall on my list. Because I think they all have I don't think there's a bad Star Wars show right now. I just think that there's, shows that like didn't live up to their full potential because of X or Y reason.
Right.
And usually I think that those reasons are too much concern with story and world building. So and you'll see that I think as my list goes on. But I think my tippy top is Andor.
Yep.
I loved Andor very much. Uh, Mando season 1 comes in
Yep.
next. I'm only doing live action because if I put animation,
Oh yeah. No.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna lose my mind here because that adds another level of complexity to the
Right.
ranking.
Yeah.
But yeah, Andor, Mando season 1, Ahsoka, Mando season 2, Book of Boba Fett, and actually no, I'm missing Obi-Wan Kenobi. Let
Yep.
me start again. Andor, Mando season 1, Ahsoka, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Mando season 2, Book of Boba Fett, and Mando season 3. There we
Okay.
go.
Yeah. No, I think that pretty much holds up with like a lot of folks. I think, these two series, especially, I think Ahsoka and Andor have been my favorites personally.
Mhm.
They're diametrically different in
Mhm.
so many ways, but yet they're inherently Star Wars at
Mhm.
at their cores, right? For different reasons. And so I think what I said most recently on the Ahsoka series was that I was putting that above Andor. I don't know now
Mhm.
that I've rewatched this twice in the last week. It's like, okay, well,
Mhm.
maybe today it's Andor. But to your point, it's hard. Like, you tell me, if you ask me who my favorite kid is, I will tell you. But if you ask me who my favorite Star Wars show is,
Yeah.
I can't. Right? It's
Right. Right.
that
Right.
difficult. Right? So it's just a very personal thing, and I think you'll find by and large that this is going to be at the top of a lot of people's lists,
Yeah.
which again speaks to all the great points.
I mean, and even if it's not, that's
Yep.
okay. And
Yeah.
like I actually enjoy watching people's different takes on why they really like something that I didn't connect with. I think that's really interesting. Even though if at the end of the day I don't agree with that take, I still think there's a lot of value to see like how people receive a show and like what it means to them.
Yeah.
So I think
Right.
having like these conversations in good faith, I think is the most important thing because we can learn a lot about like our perspectives as humans. I think that's the important thing about these shows. These shows aren't just media, they aren't just content. They're stories that talk about the human experience and how we connect to them as individuals, and to see like how other individuals connect to them kind of, makes living in society a little more fun because we can learn a lot about each other because
Right.
that's what these stories are. They're stories about us in different ways and shapes. So I think we gotta always understand that this isn't just franchise content. I mean, yes, it is
Sure.
because Disney's a corporation and they want to make money, but the people that are making these stories they're making human stories, and they're
Yeah.
making stories that talk about their experience and what it means to them. And we have to find meaning in them too, not just be like, oh well, this is canon, or I saw this cruise in this, or like how does it connect to, it's like, no, what does it mean to you, not how does it connect to Star Wars. I think we get too focused on like seeing how stories fit into canon and like how Star Wars are they, and we forget to see the human aspect of what's being said and like how it makes us feel.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we just like expect X thing, like Luke Skywalker has to be a badass. He's gonna show up with a lightsaber and mow everyone down. And your expectations weren't met, so then the movie sucks. Really? Or
Yeah.
is it
Right.
because you didn't get what the movie is doing in of itself? I
Yeah.
think that's kind of the important thing with all these things. It's kind of like seeing them where they're at and having again like those good faith conversations with fans that love the same stories that you do.
Yeah. No, great point. And we'll leave it right there. That's a great way to end the show. So, well said. Way to chime in on the humanity of it all, because at the end of the day, that's
Thank
really
you.
what this is about. So, great job there. Hey, thank you so much for being on this show tonight. Sorry, we went over
Thank you
just
for
a little
having
bit
me.
here. Yeah, no, anytime, man. Anytime you want to come over. Hey, so where can people find you and what you do?
Holy crap, that's an exhausting list right now because of social media platforms disintegrating. But again, thanks for having me. Goose from Trial of the Force. We're like we were talking about before. We're Puerto Rican podcast talking about Star Wars from like our Puerto Rican perspective. We've been at it a couple of years now. Very lucky to have presented like our podcast and our mission That's the Star Wars Celebration stage, a couple of years talking about representation. So that's kind of what we like to do, like over at our side. It's kind of very similar to what we did here today. And you can find us basically anywhere podcasts can be found: Spotify, Apple, all those things. I don't even know if Google Podcasts is a thing anymore, but if it is, you can probably find us there. But on social media, it gets spicy. We're mostly on Twitter now, called X, but if that implodes, we have like our backup accounts on Threads and Blue Sky. So we'll see which one survives the great social media wars.
Yeah.
So we're somewhere there, and a lot on Instagram. So if you like to watch stories that have nothing to do with Star Wars, follow us on Instagram at Triad of the Force, and you can find us there. Thankfully, we've been able to lock the at Triad of the Force everywhere. So, YouTube, everything, just search Trial of the Force and you'll find us.
Yeah. Awesome. And you guys do a great job. You and Nani and some of the episodes with Mo as well, but you guys do a great job knocking it out of the park. Glad to see that you guys are back in the saddle. Good luck to you with all the, we're going into a dry spell, but there's still plenty of stuff to talk about. We just got to find it there as content creators. So, all right. Hey, before we get out of here, I just want a quick program announcement. I said it at the very beginning, but coming up this week, we're going to kick off all of our High Republic Phase 3 coverage. So if you've been kind of lukewarm about Phase 2, I can tell you without giving you a lot of details right now that Phase 3 is going to blow your freaking minds away. We're back. It's like we're back to Phase 1 hype level with Phase 3. It's so good. You guys are going to love it. So we're going to Lauren and I have a number of shows that we're planned to kick all that off. And if you're not, we've got a whole backlog of shows that you can go to get caught up on. And Lauren's doing a great job of giving you like these 30-minute like breakdowns of all of Phase 2 and Phase 1, and certainly with Phase 3. So if you head out to Jedi Novel Archive at the Cantina Cast, those are her videos. She'll put those out there, and then we're going to get together, like I said, and break all of that stuff down as it comes out, because Phase 3 is like 2 weeks away, like 2.5 weeks, I think, at most. So
well, it kicked off already with the comic books with Shadows of Starlight.
Yeah.
But now we got George Mann's novel coming out. So
yes,
very excited for that.
So good. All right. Hey guys, thanks again for being here, and everyone else, thank you all for joining us. We'll see you guys here in let's see, probably about 3 days or so.
You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property, and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.